it's 100% worth it. The juice is worth the squeeze. When you get that control that's killing it on Meta, and you get that scaling on a second channel, and now you've gone from like 10K a day on target, and now you're like 25, 30K a day, and like the client's super happy. It's the best they've done since the launch of the offer or funnel. It's 100% worth it.
YouTube and Facebook are different in that people go to YouTube because they want to get information, but they also want to be entertained. So they're specifically looking for how-to kinds of things.
It's a moving target, like I've said a number of times. That is going to just clear some of the competition, right? It's going to be a little bit of a blue ocean because people are going to get frustrated. They're going to move to other channels, and you're going to find that the bar or the standard to have something be successful is going to be a lot lower than on Meta, where most advertisers can say any and everything.
And if your ad is more likely to look like something that is going to teach them something, it's more likely to pass on YouTube and start running. And if it doesn't look like native content, I have to look at the ad seriously and see if there was a strong enough message or curiosity hook to it, or if there was some sort of statement that is confusing, or a statement that is a contradiction that make people really stop scrolling, then maybe it's worth pursuing. But it has to provide some sort of value.
There's a certain element of randomness that you can't control, and our responsibility is to understand, there is like totally white, okay, you're going to be okay with saying this pretty much no matter what. There's stuff on the side that like you're pretty much never going to get away with, and then there's going to be a gray area, right? Our job is to try to narrow that gray area so that we know, okay, this is persuasive, this is going to drive performance, but more times than not, this is also going to get approved, and it's not going to be flagged, right? But you're always going to have those random things that just don't make any sense, and that's part of the compliance process.
If you've tried scaling on YouTube and watched your ads get disapproved or never even launched because compliance feels like a wall, this is for you. Marc and Christy run one of our top creative teams. They've gotten ads to 500K plus months on YouTube using language and formats that get killed on most other accounts. Today, they're going to walk you through how they do it, and they're also going to share why it's worth all the work. But before we dive in, Marc, Christy, I'd love for you just to each introduce yourself and give us, a quick intro of who you are. What do you do at TNT, and how did you end up in this line of work? So why don't we start with Christy?
Great. Thank you, Kara. I'm a creative strategist and copy chief, and I help my writing team turn out $1 million ads for our clients. And before coming to TNT, I had my own consultancy for about 10 years, and I was helping wellness professionals and e-com brands grow and scale through funnels and emails. And the last 5 years, I've specifically focused on top of funnel advertising.
Awesome. All right. And Marc, what about you?
Yeah, I'm a performance manager here at TNT. So managing the team, allocating resources, and I'm responsible for just the overall success of our clients and their offers. Before TNT, I was writing direct response copy. So a lot of the stuff that we're actually doing for our clients, I was a copywriter. And then before that, I had an e-commerce business where I was buying media, doing CRO, doing the whole thing. I had a small team, so a lot of the work I did myself. So I just had a fair amount of experience in this thing, and everything just kind of came to a head, and I found the perfect role for me.
Awesome. All right. So before we get into how you each do what you do here, let's just talk about the big why behind this episode. Just like, why is it worth D2C operators putting in all the work? And we all know it can be a ton of work and time to crack YouTube when Meta is so much easier. What do you typically tell your clients, Marc, when you're talking to them about it? Or Christy, why don't we start with you, Marc?
Yeah, so, if I had to sum it up, it's higher scale, which is what we all want, more stability, which is something that, again, everyone wants, and then more leverage on resources. And I'll dive into that in a second. So higher scale, obviously, you're producing these ads, you're having them written. Finding a winner is pretty challenging, right? Like, a net new win can be pretty hard to come by. And when you find that win, the work that's involved in getting it to become compliant from Facebook to Google, or from Meta to Google or YouTube, is far less work than if you were to look for a new winner on Meta, right? You should always be looking for new winners, but that compliance edit is going to be far less work, and it's going to deliver at least twice as much scale. And it also allows you to shift budget. Sometimes we know that there's algorithm changes or costs creep up. When you're running on two channels like that, let's just say a minimum of two channels, and Facebook or Meta is no longer performing the way it did 4 or 6 weeks ago, and YouTube or Google still performing, well, you can shift that budget. you don't have these peaks and troughs in spend and performance. You can kind of smooth that out, right? So that's the stability. And then finally, leverage. I just kind of mentioned that a little bit, but you've got your team and they're writing, they're editing ads, they're producing things. Now that ad's already produced, it's scaled on Facebook. The changes that you make do not require as much labor, and there's not as time intensive as looking for a new win, right? Because you might have to write 5-10 more net new concepts to find a new win, whereas the changes you're making are minimal pretty often to get that to perform on a second channel, right? So say those are the three reasons why I think DTC operators should consider YouTube.
Yeah, those are good reasons. Christy, what about you? Anything you'd add?
A lot of the same things, but in general, when more creative scaling is scaling, then on one or more platforms, it reduces your risk. So basically, you're hedging your bets. And then it also increases the confidence in the team and in the client side. So you actually get more opportunities to experiment with different things because you know that certain things are working. And there's more room. Since you're making more money, it gives you more creative freedom.
Yeah. And I'm just curious, what are some misconceptions you've heard from clients or just maybe even colleagues in the industry when they're talking about YouTube and they're considering it, but maybe on it, but not quite figuring it out, or they want to go on it, but they're not quite sure how to do it. What do you think, Mark? What do you hear?
I think the biggest thing is that it's not worth it. Right,
Okay.
It's not worth it. We're already doing well on Facebook or Meta, and we're running into so many compliance roadblocks. Our accounts are getting suspended. Our ads are getting disapproved. We don't know what to do. The effort, the headache is not worth it. And I would disagree with that wholeheartedly. You do have to spend time to kind of understand what Google likes and doesn't like. You do have to set up, some systems, but once those are set up, it really, really pays off, and it's 100% worth it.
And are you able to share any examples of what's possible at a higher level based off what you two have seen, just to get anyone who's watching a little more excited about what's possible?
Yeah, I mean, I can say that, for a lot of the clients that I work with that are doing better, if we're talking about daily ad spend numbers, I think for most clients who do pretty well, I think like 10,000 a day, 15,000 a day on Meta is like a pretty solid spend amount, right? Now, getting past that on just one channel, like on Meta alone, is pretty difficult because your creative is going to churn pretty quickly and you have to just produce a lot of creative. But if you add a second channel, if you add YouTube, you can easily hit 30 grand a day and hit your target ROAS or your target cost per purchase and scale beyond that. We've had several clients that have had months where they're hitting 50K plus days throughout the entire month on target. And we really couldn't have done that without a second big channel like YouTube.
And to speak to the second channel, I mean, your clients could choose, or you could advise them to go on many other different channels that we'll, talk about on this podcast and other episodes. But why would you say, hey, we should really look at YouTube versus these 6 other ones?
Yeah. I think, if we were to just pick another one that a lot of our clients might consider or have seen some of their competitors have success in, let's pick native, right? And it goes back to leverage. When you're thinking about native, the ads in native are pretty different than the ads that you have on YouTube or on Facebook, right? YouTube and Facebook is more video dominant. Native, you have a static image, and then you typically have an advertorial or a jump page that needs to be optimized, it needs to be designed, right? And that optimization process is pretty different from taking your Facebook winners and just repurposing them and making compliance edits and getting them to YouTube, right? You've already done the majority of the work, whereas if you're choosing another channel like native, the work is pretty different right now. If you pick another channel like Snapchat or TikTok, well, those audiences are pretty different, and then the scale is really not there, right? Like TikTok, we've seen is smaller scale. Snapchat, we're testing, but I imagine also way smaller scale. So YouTube has the benefit of having large scale because it's a huge audience on there, and you've already produced the assets and they work.
Yeah, easier lift, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
So let's shift into how the two of you work together, Mark on performance and Christy on creative strategy. Can you walk us through it? Maybe Christy, start just like, what does that look like in a typical week for the two of you in collaboration related to compliance and launching on YouTube?
Well, I think for my part, it's more about looking at what has been performing creatively and what I think might work on YouTube. We always collaborate, however, on seeing what numbers really make sense and where we should focus. So for what I talked to Marc about is really, what do you think numbers wise or revenue wise is going to make the most sense?
And then what are you looking for revenue wise, Marc, when you're thinking about that?
Yeah, so what I'm looking at is what have we launched recently on Meta that is showing strong signal, right? That has a certain amount of spend, it's at a certain efficiency that I think, okay, if we have to do, let's call it 3 rounds of revisions to get it compliant, is this going to be worth the squeeze, right? And I'm deciding, okay, this ad looks promising. Let's get the writers working on this ad. So that's one of the big things, is where are the opportunities? And then the other thing is, which accounts are showing signs of fatigue on YouTube, right? Where do we have a downward trend that we need to reverse, and where should we be focusing? That's kind of what I'm looking at.
And when you're talking about efficiency and spend, can you just share some examples of what might grab your attention when you're looking at ads from Meta that you can move over?
Yeah. So, in terms of the testing element, right, in terms of what we're testing on a specific ad on Facebook, I'm usually looking at net new concepts, right? Sometimes a net new concept, if it's a win, it can have a huge impact on the account. If we have a net new win, and let's say it spent $5,000 and it's still like 10-20% above whatever efficiency we're shooting at, then we know, okay, this net new has legs and we should work to get this onto YouTube, right? So that's the big one. The other one is sometimes like a format test, right? So maybe we have like a walk and talk ad, and we decided, okay, this would be perfect as like a 2-person pod. Maybe it was a narrative story ad, and if we have one person telling the story to another person, well, visually that's going to look really different than the walk and talk. And if it's a big win, then our audience on YouTube may not recognize it from the initial variation because it just visually looks so different, right? So those are the types of ads that I'm looking at. And then, like I said, usually like $5-ish grand or more in spend and above efficiency, because we know as we scale, oftentimes that efficiency drops, right?
Yeah. And then so are you then moving it over to Google right away, Christy, without compliance edits, just to see if it'll run? Or do you typically run it through compliance, like one round of compliance edits first? What does that look like for you?
The process usually is to try to run it on YouTube and see if it'll pass. That's the easiest way. Yeah. What can we do with this? If it doesn't, then we start it into the compliance process.
Do you have a rough idea of how many ads will kind of sneak through without a pass, an editing pass? Like, is it 50%?
It's kind of hit or miss. Marc might know better. I mean, I feel like we just kind of...
I know it's based on account too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that percentage changes. And the reason it changes is because compliance, especially on Google, is a moving target, right? Like in January, things were a little bit easier. They were a little less strict with what we could run. And come like end of February, March, then we knew, okay, we really have to put this through a lot of edits, or some pretty substantial edits to get it to run, right? So right now, I would say that few things would probably make it through compliance as is if we just took it from Meta straight to YouTube. But in the bright side is that when you launch a lot of things and you can kind of collect that feedback from Google, you have a long list of feedback from them, and you can get it to run within like 1 revision or 2 revisions. So even though you're still having to make changes, you can get it to run pretty quickly. It's not going to take several weeks most of the time.
Okay, and we are in June. I don't think we said that, just so we can capture the timing. So you'd say like right now, as of June 2026, it's a little bit less stringent on Google. Is that safe to say, or are we mid? Where are we?
More on the higher side, I'd imagine.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
More on the higher side. Yeah, a little bit more on the higher side. I think January, beginning of the year, was less stringent, and it's become a little bit more stringent, I'd say.
And what do you connect that to? Do you have either of you have any theories about like what is determining that factor of I guess just like how strict it is at this point? Have you noticed anything, Christy?
It could be a lot of different things. We don't really know. Sometimes if these companies are in the news, it could affect, especially if they have lawsuits against them, it could affect advertising.
Yeah.
Some clients have mentioned earnings, right? say there's a certain amount of earnings or a stock price that they're shooting for, and they decide, oh well, we're not on target to meet whatever earnings. Let's loosen up what we allow to run so we can collect more revenue and so that we can look better. And maybe at certain points they might see, people are having a worse experience on the platform because of some of the ads they're seeing, and we're not retaining viewers. Then maybe they dial up how strict they are on compliance, right? So I would imagine it's probably a combination of those things, and then what Christy mentioned. So user experience, and then also earnings for the company.
Right. So it's less about the why anyway, because we can't control it, but just I think having the awareness to know right now it's strict, so we will have to do 3 rounds. We're probably not going to be able to just launch it straight to YouTube, and just having that awareness will be helpful. Mm-hmm. Christy, let's shift to kind of your part. Let's say the ad did not launch with no editing to YouTube, so it's coming back to your desk as the creative strategist. What does your role look like, and what are you doing through this process?
Hey, just wanted to pop in for a quick break and let you know that if you're interested in signing up for our newsletter because you're enjoying the insights here and you want to get weekly insights directly to your inbox from our team of specialized experts, go ahead and use the link in the description to sign up for our newsletter, Scaling Secrets. And with no further ado, let's get back to the episode.
Well, actually, the feedback is a good sign in a way, because you're finding out what they don't like. And that gives you just more information for the future about what you should be launching or not launching. One of the things that I've noticed in general is that YouTube and Facebook are different in that people go to YouTube because they want to get information, but they also want to be entertained. So they're specifically looking for how-to kinds of things. And if your ad is more likely to look like something that is going to teach them something, it's more likely to pass on YouTube and start running. It basically looks like native content. And if it doesn't look like native content, I have to look at the ad seriously and see if this is something that would eventually be able to run on YouTube. And if there was a strong enough message or a curiosity hook to it, or if there was some sort of statement that is confusing, or a statement that is a contradiction that make people really stop scrolling, then maybe it's worth pursuing. But it has to provide some sort of value.
Do you have an example of something that maybe you looked at and you're like, I don't think this is going to work on YouTube. It's not worth the time, without calling out a specific offer or just a general description of it?
I'll say that I've written a couple of those ads, and they're basically curiosity-driven open loop ads, where it might start with like a quiz. So like a food quiz, like which of these foods is worse for your condition? And the ad never answers the question. So that's less likely to pass on YouTube.
Right. Okay. But when you're talking about how-to formats, can you share some of those formats that are the ones that we typically use at TNT that are like, this is going to do really well on YouTube because it is a specific format?
Sure. Some of those formats are things that are educational. We write a lot of very science-specific ads that go into, say, human anatomy and the way things work and why they stop working. And I think those ads work really well on YouTube. Another type is something that looks native, is a podcaster talking about a topic, because that looks really native on YouTube and it's something that people look for. And another type would be a format that we came up with, which is we call expert debunk, but it's basically a person watching a video and arguing with it, basically, and saying why it's not true or what the real reason is behind the problem that people are dealing with.
And when you're thinking about the compliance process, are you also thinking about each individual account? Because I guess what have you observed about different accounts, since you're managing multiple accounts, both of you? Are some more strict with compliance than others? You have to factor that in and really have that history built up to make smart decisions with each account.
Well, from my perspective, I think a lot of it has to do with the sensitivity of the problem. Yeah. And if you're calling out certain anatomical things or conditions, being really careful about not being too graphic. So it depends kind of on the client, though.
Anything you'd add to that, Mark?
Yeah, I think, at one point we were aggregating the feedback that we got from all of our accounts, right? We'd aggregate all the feedback, and we would, we created something on an AI, whether it's on Google or Chat, GPT, and we would attempt to make edits based off aggregated feedback. And I felt that we could improve on that approach because we know that it's so account specific, right? If you have a digestion offer, there's going to be certain visuals that are specific to digestion, certain language specific to digestion that they're just not going to be okay with, right? And maybe some of the B-roll too, right? And sometimes if you're applying that across accounts, it's not going to be one-to-one. Whereas if you're taking inventory of everything that's getting flagged for your specific account, you're going to be able to reach an approved ad that scales a lot faster, right? So I think understanding the feedback is going to be specific to the vertical, and that's what's going to help you get to some compliant faster. And then also certain accounts are just going to be in what I call a hole, right? Maybe you've had a long stretch of tons and tons of disapprovals, and Google's got a close eye on it. In those instances, it might be more challenging to get things approved, and your edits will have to be a little bit more aggressive, so to speak. You'll have to remove more claims. The visuals will need to be a little bit cleaner. So yeah, there's definitely some differences between accounts and verticals.
Yeah, you almost just need to have a catalog where you're summarizing or analyzing each account and running that through Claude or whatever chatbot you're using rather than the aggregate. But that being said, if we can just look at kind of the general feedback and generally what's working and go through a couple of the layers I know that you're thinking about, Christy, like copy and visuals. We talked a little bit about format, hooks. If we can kind of touch on each one of those just briefly to talk about any patterns both of you have seen. And again, I know this is kind of defeats the purpose of what we just said, that it's different based on each account. And you can use a word for this account that you can't use for another account. It's all very individual, but there still are some takeaways that we can use in those decisions you're making around copy. So Christy, what would you say you're looking for or, removing, thinking through when you're reviewing copy?
Okay, so when I'm looking at copy, I'm looking at word choices. One of the things that sometimes happens is writers don't write the most compliant copy. They might say things that are verbs that you want to avoid that sound like you're curing something. So cure for sure, but fixes, repairs, detoxes, flushes, heals, words like that. And automatically, I know they're going to get flagged. So you need to add in more compliant words like supports, helps, maintains. Another problem is time and outcome stacking. So like specific numbers over a specific time frame. For example, like a 7-second fix that you can do and you'll get results in just days. That'll get flagged, things like that. And then language around, if you're talking about a problem, you can't say like you're going to have this problem. The way to get around that is you do like a first person account of how somebody else fixed their problem instead of talking directly at the viewer who might find that distressing. That's what they say. It's like you can't say anything distressing.
Right. And that goes back to what you shared about formats and thinking through the formats that work best on YouTube. And it is that like the podcast format where it's a first person account of something negative that happened to them or some suffering involved, but that is more likely to get passed through because it is that first-hand account. Which other formats do you think would help with that first person account and story?
If it's like one of those personal stories where it's like a confessional, like I did this or I didn't know that this was happening to me, and I got dismissed by my doctor and it was so frustrating, and then finally I found the real solution and I can't believe I couldn't find it until now, and I'm so mad, but now I'm happy because everything's fixed. If it's coming from that person's point of view, that's usually passes. That's okay.
Yeah. And we can talk about visuals next, but that made me think about or wonder if in your process, the two of you will make sure you can get something through compliance, even if it takes 1 or 2 rounds. You get it through, it's running, but then you're like, well, I wonder if we stripped out too much or if we made it too compliant, will you then go back in and test the 7-second whatever and maybe use some of the language you thought you couldn't use, but put it back in to see if you can try it? How do you each approach that part? Mark, what about you?
Yeah, I would say it's on a case by case basis, right? I think let's just say you had an ad and you stripped a bunch of stuff away and you launched it and you had a variation get approved and it just didn't perform. I would look to see how well did it do or how well is it doing on Facebook, right? This is an ad that's driven, I don't know, 100,000 in spend plus, then it's definitely worth the time to go in there and determine, okay, we were successful in testing this, making it compliant, but now how do we get this to actually perform too, right? I think if the ad maybe had, let's call it $5,000 in spend and did okay, then maybe it's not worth going in there and chipping away at it, right? Because there could be something else in the account that's higher priority, higher probability of actually driving performance. So it's, I'd say it's a case by case basis. Yeah, I'd probably say.
Okay, yeah, that's really helpful. And jumping back into visuals, so we covered copy and what you're looking for, Christy, but what are you thinking through when you're looking at the visuals or you're coaching your writing team and they're reviewing the visuals?
So visuals are interesting. There's sometimes we put in some things that look kind of graphic and are flagged by YouTube as disturbing. So things like if you're, seeing B-roll of an operating room or needles or any sort of exposed organs, even if it's just like a diagram, sometimes YouTube will flag that. You can't show any sort of obvious distress. I think we had one like clickbait at the beginning of an ad where somebody's walking with the shopping bag and all of a sudden it shows like they're in the hospital.
Right.
That one got flagged
that one.
because it looks like they died. So stuff like that, you can't do that. You have to just soften it. And so what we do when we're making it more compliant is using analogies instead of, actual footage or, things that look distressing. So those are the kinds of switches that we make.
Were you able to get that one through compliance after making some visual edits?
Well, yeah, I think we got the ad through, but we didn't use those visuals at all. So like, for example, we have an ad that deals with skin, and skin is one of those things that it's like sensitive. And we're talking about like skin swelling. So instead of actually showing like puffy skin, we had a visual where there are balloons that were like superimposed over legs, and that got through.
Yeah.
It's like that kind of, yeah, like it's like kind of like this is an analogy. It's not the real thing.
Right. And from Google's perspective, is this all really based off like their user experience and making sure their users aren't like watching their favorite podcast and then see an ad where it's something absolutely disturbing on the screen and they offend that person and damage their audience?
I believe so.
Yeah. So let's just like make sure it's a good experience all around with the ads they're watching. So it's delightful and still working and performing. We covered copy, visuals. You already mentioned formats and really thinking about which format would work best for YouTube, and you shared those. The final element is the hook pre-roll. So how are you thinking about that part, Christy?
It's kind of similar to what I was saying before about the, pre-roll, clickbait kinds of things. It's like, how can you come up with something that is visually expressing the same idea without being so graphic? So just thinking of any sort of other weird imagery that is not distressing. Maybe it's something where, I don't know, instead of blood, you're showing flowers or something weird like that, something blooming. But it's enough that people will stop scrolling because they'll be like, what is happening there? And it's not distressing.
Right. Still grabbing the attention, but not distressing. Mm-hmm. And what do you personally wish that we could say writers in general, but also your writers understood before sending you a draft to review with compliance edits? And we can share this with them later.
I think one of the biggest things that writers miss when they're writing is thinking about who's watching and what state are they in. And that's in general. It's not just compliance. It's really about, is the person, looking for some information and it's the middle of the day and, they're just like taking a break from work, or are they like doom scrolling at night and they just want to be entertained? So what's their frame of mind? What are they looking for? are they actually trying to solve a problem, or are they just trying to distract themselves? That's one of the main things. Yeah.
And when you're thinking about all four of these elements working together, which one are you going to attack first when you are reviewing, or are you just kind of always thinking about the big picture? It's like it's a blend of all the elements if you had to prioritize.
It's a case by case basis, because I'm getting feedback first, and I have to look at the feedback and see if it's are they really talking more about visuals, or are they talking about language? Like, what's the real problem here? And sometimes it's a problem with the landing page, which I have less control over. It's not so much the ad. But in general, especially for that account, what are the biggest flags that keep coming up over and over again? So what part do I need to focus on first? Because sometimes it's visuals, but sometimes it's language, and sometimes it's the two working together.
And then let's go over to you, Marc. And you talked about kind of the initial review that you do on Meta to see what numbers look promising and what's worth moving over. But can we do a deeper dive into what you're doing on every Monday to really think about compliance and keep that a top priority to continue to scale on YouTube?
Yeah, I think one of the most important pieces of this process is, we're used to the workflow of like producing a new ad, right? We get the ad written, it gets edited, it gets tested, we collect data, we iterate. With compliance edits, now there's a couple additional steps, right? And specifically for us, there are, I'd say, at least 2 team members who are involved in now this process, right? And with 2 new team members being part of this process, and with more steps for things to fall through the cracks, it's important to stay on top of the test that you're running, right? What was tested over the last 2 weeks? What round of revision are we in? Has this been sitting at a certain round for a certain amount of days? Is this moving through writing and editing quickly? Is it not? Right? Because you can get caught up in the day-to-day and so many things and client calls, and before you know it, you've got this control that's driven 100K plus in spend that you're trying to get onto YouTube, that it's been sitting in the same stage for like a week and a half, and you're just like, oh, I didn't know, right? So staying on top of that whole pipeline is important with the additional team members and the additional steps where things can get stuck. That's probably the biggest one, I'd say.
Yeah, and what are some mistakes maybe that you've made that you can share that we can avoid? Just because I think it can be so overwhelming to manage that entire process, and it seems like prioritization is so key. So what have you learned along the way that has helped you now tighten this process so it actually works?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. So I would say the first one is, don't assume that the edits that worked a week ago or 2 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago are still going to be the same ones that can get through on YouTube, right? Because like I said, compliance is kind of a moving target based off of factors outside of our control. And there was a point at which, I felt that, okay, we just have to make X, Y, Z changes. If we make these changes, all of our ads are going to make it through, right? And I would launch campaign after campaign, ad after ad. Then I would now look back at a 4-8 week period, and I'm like, wow, very few things actually got tested and actually drove performance. So when I realized that, then I started looking at the trend, right? We've done 6 compliance tests, 8 compliance tests over the past 3-4 weeks, and our approval rate's like 75-80%. Okay, that's great. But if it's like 10%, then what maybe feedback isn't going back to the writers or the editors that should be going back to them so that our approval rate is a little bit higher, right? So that's the first one, is just knowing that it's a moving target and that we need to stay on top of the new feedback that we're receiving when we're appealing ads. So that's the big one. The other one slipped my mind. So
are you the one, you said you keep mentioning the 2 team members who are supporting this, but are you managing this entire, it sounds like a spreadsheet, or is this something that another member could handle? I'm just thinking through, like, anyone listening that wants to really get a handle on managing this, what can be an intense process, how they can do it efficiently. Yeah,
so internally, what I think should be delegated to a team member who's not like the main driver of performance would be the appeal process, right? Is is somebody who's going to review the ad a day after launch, appeal it within Google's platform, and then track that we're actually getting that feedback, right? You don't want your traffic manager, media buyer doing that because that's going to take up a lot of their time. You know, if you're somebody who's responsible for performance, you probably don't want to be doing that either. So that is a key team member who, you know, this is someone who you want dedicated to this, right? Or at least partially dedicated. And then the other thing is you want somebody who is going to monitor feedback from Google or YouTube to trigger the next round of revision, right? So internally, you know, what I do is I'll select an ad that we want to do this whole process on, and then we have a team member who creates what we call cards internally, so like just a task within our PM tool. And every time we receive new feedback, that team member goes and creates a new card so that the writer can begin the process, right? You want the person who's responsible for performance to kind of do one thing and then let the system work on its own, right? So I don't know if that's specific enough.
Yeah. And then how do you think about appealing versus rewriting for your team members?
Yeah, like Christy said, I think it depends on what your success rate is for certain ads, right? Sometimes if you think that, hey, things are going pretty smoothly here, we understand what copy and visuals we can and can't use, then maybe we just we don't rewrite or we rewrite. But yeah, I would say most of the time as of now, we're appealing because that feedback is valuable, right? That feedback that was when somebody from Google's compliance team jumps into the ad and says, well, you know, you've said this and this, and you've used this and these and these visuals. That is valuable to us because we're tracking all that, right? And if we're saying, okay, 4 out of our 5 last appeals, this type of claim has been flagged, well, we know that we probably can't use that on the next one, right? So I would say we appeal more often than not.
And what is a disapproval that taught you something that you couldn't have learned any other way?
Yeah, so there was an instance where we had an ad that was approved, right? We made some changes to it. We launched it on YouTube. It was approved. And then we iterated on that ad. The change was very small. The change was also compliant based off of what we'd received from Google. And the new ad was flagged and it was disapproved, and it was flagged for a handful of things that the previous one hadn't been flagged for, right? And what it taught us is that like there's a certain element of randomness, right? There's a certain element of randomness that you can't control. And our responsibility is to understand, you know, there is like totally white, okay, you're going to be okay with saying this pretty much no matter what. There's stuff on the side that like you're pretty much never going to get away with. And then there's going to be a gray area, right? Our job is to try to narrow that gray area so that we know, okay, this is persuasive, this is going to drive performance, but more times than not, this is also going to get approved and it's not going to be flagged, right? But you're always going to have those random things that just don't make any sense. And that's part of the compliance process.
Yeah, it makes me wonder just like what your mindset is. I mean, I think you're describing it right now, but for each of you, what is your mindset when approaching this type of compliance work? Because some of it does feel so random and like, how can we possibly figure this out if this doesn't make any sense today? So, I mean, I think what you're saying, Mark, does make sense. Like being okay with the randomness and knowing that it's still worth the learning because you are decreasing the random element and learning every single time. But I can see where it could be frustrating for some people. I mean, it's been frustrating for me at times where I'm like, this just doesn't make sense. So is this really worth it when it does feel so random at times? So I guess, yeah, the question is like, how do you each approach it so that you don't, I don't want to say don't give up on it because it's your job not to give up on it, but so that you feel like engaged and focused on it.
Hey, just a quick interruption to remind you that there's a link in the description of this episode for you to book a free strategy call with our team of specialized experts, whether it's creative, media buying, or conversion rate optimization that is causing a bottleneck in your business right now. We'd love to help. So use that link in the description below and book your free strategy call. Now let's get back to it.
I see it as like a game.
Yeah.
It's like a puzzle. It's, you know, figuring out it's almost like finding the right key that's going to fit. And then how cool is it when it finally opens that door? But you don't really know. So just seeing what you can do. And I think it actually makes you be a little bit more creative because you have to think about what is actually going to pass compliance, but also make sense and also intrigue the viewer.
Yeah, and what I was thinking as you were asking that question, Kira, is that the juice is worth the squeeze, right? It's when you have, you might have to go through several rounds, but when you get that control that's killing it on Meta, and you get that scaling on a second channel, and now you've gone from like 10K a day on target, and now you're like 25, 30K a day, and like the client's super happy. It's the best they've done since the launch of the offer funnel. It's 100% worth it. It's so worth it. Yeah, it's so worth it. And all it takes, like I said, is kind of that first big win. You see the payoff, and okay, I'm okay with the randomness. I'm okay with like the goalpost moving, because if we just have a couple of these working, right? Like on Meta, your creative churn is like pretty fast, right? Like you have to produce a lot of ads because they churn through pretty quickly. On YouTube, they have a lot more longevity. You can scale those for a lot longer, and you don't need as many of those successful tests to really drive a lot of performance and performance and scale. I mean,
yeah, and it's a game where you can win big. So Christy, I don't think you've shared, but you've had many wins, but you had a really big win with your compliance work. I don't know if you can share it without giving specific details, but just to share, like it's worth playing the game because of this win.
The way I did it was I had an ad that I needed to try to get on YouTube because it was doing really well on Facebook. And so I made a very compliant version. Maybe basically, I think 4 or 6 versions, and then one that was like uber compliant, and then had a bunch of different visual metaphors instead of the more graphic things, and it just worked. And I cut out a lot of stuff that it seemed like maybe aggressive cuts to some people, but I thought that the ad was still going to have the same meaning and drive enough people to keep watching, and it worked, and it just scaled. It just scaled the account like magic. And it was a 1 round of revisions.
That shows just what you were saying about how it forces you to be even more creative and use your experience and skill set to really think about problem solving in a new way.
Exactly.
All right, well, as we start to wrap, I do want to ask each of you if there is a specific test that you ran recently, last month or two, that maybe surprised you, wasn't what you expected, anything that really stood out that you can share with us and maybe teach a little lesson connected to it. Mark, anything?
Yeah, so this goes back to the formats conversation we were having earlier, where, I think we had an ad that was like a talking inanimate object, right? I think we've all seen those as of late, like, a talking heart or a talking whatever, right? And works really well on Facebook. And I think, like Christy was saying, Facebook, Instagram, maybe I hate to use the word mindless, but you're kind of doom scrolling, right? Just wanting to be entertained. And that worked incredibly well on Facebook. And we tested it on YouTube, and it didn't perform as well, right? It didn't perform as well. And I think that, it kind of goes back to like what type of content feels native on YouTube, and what, if someone's in the middle of their podcast and they get hit with a 5-second ad, well, if you've got this random talking heart thing, it's gonna look a little bit different. It's gonna feel different and disruptive to the podcast that they were watching. Whereas if it's like another podcast and you call out their problem and you promise some solution and you build some intrigue in those first 5 seconds, well, you're going to have a better chance of that person sticking around, watching more of the ad, and clicking through to the landing page.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, if we're saying this is how-to content, educational, with, almost like a dash of entertainment too, but not strictly entertainment. If it is that talking heart that is entertaining, but there's no educational element, or it's limited, it might not work.
It feels maybe a little bit less educational than like a podcast, because that you recognize the format, and the format's like, oh, podcast, I'm going to learn something, right?
Yeah, it doesn't feel native. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Christy, anything that surprised you?
No, sorry.
I love it.
None of it surprised you because you knew exactly what was going to happen.
No, I just
that good.
Everything is a surprise, so I'm basically nothing shocking.
Nothing is shocking anymore. Okay, all right. So let's wrap up with some tactical takeaways, because we covered a lot. There's a lot to consider when doing this work, but the win is worth it at the end. And so, Mark, can you give like one action step someone could take if they want to start running their ads on YouTube, and maybe they've tried it previously and they gave up, but they're determined to do it this time around? What could they do or think about? What would be your next step?
Yeah, I think, you don't need a big team. You don't need a lot of help. I think you can develop that eventually if you're going to systematize it, which I suggest that everyone does. But I think what a small team could easily do is, take whatever's working on Facebook and you don't even need to make a lot of edits. Maybe you don't make a single edit, but just run it, try to run it on YouTube. It'll likely get flagged and appeal it, right? Appeal it, do that a couple of times. And after, let's say, half a dozen appeals, you're going to have a fair amount of feedbacks directly from the people who are reviewing, making those decisions. And you're going to know exactly what they like and what they don't like. And based off of that, pick an ad and have a team member write a couple variations and edit a couple variations, maybe one through maybe I'd say at least four to six variations, each progressively more compliant, removing more things that you think are going to get flagged. And I would bet that within maybe a round or two of revisions, something's going to get approved, and you're going to determine if YouTube is viable for your business, which I think for most businesses it is going to be.
Yeah, that's great. Nice and actionable. Christy, what would you say? What advice would you give?
Similarly, test really rapidly. It's worth it. You should be doing minimal edits, meaning that you're not rewriting things wholesale, but just cutting things out, maybe changing some of the visuals, but it shouldn't be that difficult to do. So you should be able to turn around ads really quickly. And then when you're getting that feedback loop going, it just gives you more ammo for figuring out what's actually going to work for the account.
Amazing. And just to end on a really positive note, what are you excited about? Like, where do you see the biggest opportunity over the next 3 to 6 months for all the accounts and the clients you're working with? Like, what excites each of you about the opportunities on YouTube?
So I would say that because it's a moving target, like I've said a number of times, that is going to just clear some of the competition, right? It's going to be a little bit of a blue ocean because people are going to get frustrated. They're going to move to other channels, and you're going to find that the bar or the standard to have something be successful is going to be a lot lower than on Meta, where most advertisers can say any and everything, right? Because Google is so stringent and they're filtering out so many of those people who are pretty wild and pretty aggressive with claims, you can still get a lot of performance and a lot of scale out of things that are a little bit more dialed down, right? Whereas if you take that same ad on Facebook, it's probably not going to scale the same way it would on YouTube.
Yeah, that is exciting. That gets me excited. All right, Christy, what about you? What's exciting?
I think specifically writing for YouTube, I think that's a big opportunity that we have. And then YouTube Shorts. Those seem to be doing really well. And I'd like to do more with that because I think we get a lot to scale that way.
Yeah, we'll have to do a separate episode all about YouTube Shorts topic. Okay, well, I want to thank both of you for giving me your time this week because I know you both are very busy getting your ads on YouTube and doing 100 other things. And so thank you for sharing all your processes and experience and wins and struggles with me and with all of our listeners. So thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.